welcome to another episode of the Talking Horses podcast in association with Roudee Racing, by the people, for the people, the weekly podcast that looks behind the curtain of the sport with a view to increasing understanding, accessibility and enjoyment of racing for all. Ben and Bruno, back with you again. Bruno, how you doing, my friend?
Oh, very well, very well. Just trying to grapple with this flat racing stuff, but enjoying the learning experience. Starting to sort of tip things up as we did last weekend, albeit unsuccessfully, which I'm sure we'll come to. Kind of gets you into it, and the whole derby bit we did last week actually just ignited a bit of a fire thing around the whole breeding side of things and the pedigree stuff. So, starting to find some nice angles to at least come across as if I've got some sort of knowledge in this code of the sport.
You have a lot more than you give yourself credit for. Yeah, and thank you to everybody for their kind feedback on that derby segment. I think the plan was to try and sort of demystify it and tackle some of the sort of key underpinnings of the derby, really, that perhaps don't get talked about very much in the mainstream racing media. So seems as though there was a lot of people saying that that was shedding some light on stuff that they didn't particularly know about, and this is even people that have been racing fans for a long time. So that was fantastic. Thank you everybody for the feedback there. So this week we are fortunate enough to have another special guest from the Roudee Racing ownership group. Scott Davis is going to be with us talking about his involvement with Ibiza Love and Glorious Angel. Then we've got Mike from Roudee Racing back to give us his view on the performances of Ibiza Love and Roudemental at Doncaster last Saturday, before looking ahead to tomorrow and Glorious Angel's run up at Haydock. And then you and I, Bruins, will be back to tackle this week's Deep Ground before giving a weekend selection. This week's Deep Ground is race-going experience, and are racegoers getting the best bang for their buck? So I'm looking forward to getting into that with you. I feel like you might have some fairly strong opinions on that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say. It's very possible, yeah.
That's what we want. Mm-hmm. We want firm opinions in this. Great stuff. So without further ado then, I spoke to Scott earlier this morning about his involvement with horses for the first time. Fantastic interview. And thank you, Scott, for his time. So over to that, followed by Mike, and then we'll be back with you shortly. So we're very lucky to have another of the Roudee Racing ownership group, Scott Davis, joining us today to talk to us about his experience with the sport and obviously more recently with ownership. Scott, you and I met at the Chester May Festival a couple of weeks ago. That was good fun, wasn't it?
We did, yeah. We did, Ben. Yeah, first, I think we've been sort of corresponding on the WhatsApp group for a while, and then finally good to put a sort of a face to a name with yourself and Bruno, to be fair, coming up from down south. So yeah, no, it was a great few days.
Absolutely, yeah, it really was. So hopefully many more days to come on the racecourse and perhaps off it as well. So
sure.
So yeah, what we wanted to talk to you about today was kind of, I suppose, everything from the origins of racing getting into your blood, Scott, all the way through to today and being involved with ownership. We had a really nice chat at Chester actually sort of about that, and so the moment we did, I thought this is a story that we'd love to tell on the pod. So I suppose let's go right back to the beginning again. How did you sort of first fall in love with racing?
Well, I think my earliest memory of racing was actually at my granddad's, who was an absolute keen bettor, and his favourites was watching Willie Carson on the flat or Peter Scudamore, over the jumps back in the day. And I always remember the bet. He always used to walk up to the betting shop up to Ladbrokes and put a 5p Yankee bet on, and if he won that, he was lucky to get sort of £6 or £7 back, but to him it was like winning the lottery. And that sort of early exposure, I guess, to racing, and studying the form, looking at. I mean, he used to buy the Daily Mirror. It wasn't quite the Daily, the Racing Post, but and understanding what it all meant. And I think that was the earliest sort of introduction that I had to racing. And it wasn't till later on in life, and we moved to near Chester, and being a sort of in my late teens, going to Chester races, and as soon as you've been there, and living local, it just gets in your blood. And of course, it starts with the more social side of the racing. So it was, go out, have a few beers, place a few bets, see if you can win some money and have a laugh. But then it changed for me, really. It went more into the horses. And certainly my wife, Gail, she's, been around horses all her life and ridden. Nice. And I rode for a very, very brief spell, which was very unsuccessful after being thrown off into a hedge once or twice. And then more latterly, my daughter. So yeah, when Gail and I got together, and she had a love of horses, and we then became Chester members. Mm-hmm. So we were members at Chester for a good few years. And yeah, okay, it's a bit about the social side, but we found ourselves, more sort of hanging around the parade ring, looking at the horses, studying the form, understanding, almost the backstory behind each horse, and then looking at, the bit that always fascinated me was the pedigree side of things. How sort of the bloodlines worked, and I still don't fully understand it. I'm still learning a hell of a lot about it, but that was the sort of introduction, I guess, into horse racing and the world. And like I say, fortunate enough to live in Chester, in and around Chester, which gave us a really racing. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that was one of the sort of things I wanted to ask you, was your sort of first racecourse experience. So it sounds like that was Chester. And, I think one of the things that Bruno and I are going to be talking about sort of later on in this episode is the sort of the race day experience for racegoers, and particularly at a time of sort of, increase in the cost of living. And there's a lot of stuff about this in the racing media at the moment around falling attendances. Yeah. It's really important for racecourses to make sure that what they are offering to the racegoer is value for money. And I think, I'm sure you would agree, Chester probably leads the way with regard to the sort of racegoer experience. Would that be sort of fair to say from your perspective?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that they've made massive investments. So certainly over the last sort of 5 to 10 years, really, to make it what it is today. And even so, before the May Festival, Gail and I hadn't been to the races since pre-COVID. And even the sort of the changes to the course and the investment that they've made, and, all about that, like you say, that racegoer experience. They've put a lot of effort into that. And, having been lucky enough to travel around a bit, and I've done the Ebor Festival up in York before now. Nice. Haydock's been a quite a local stomping ground as well. And Chester's just, I think because it's our hometown as well, it is something special, but they certainly make that extra effort in terms of that experience and the facilities that are there for the entertainment and use of the racegoers. So yeah, it is a special place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that story you tell about how it seems that a lot of people come into the sport. The more people that we talk to on the podcast, and generally you find that the majority have sort of come into it from a sort of punter's perspective, whether that be a family member that they were sort of looking up to and enjoying the father or the grandfather or grandmother or whoever it was having a bet, and then developing a love for the sport and the animals within the sport from there. And so I guess sort of with Chester being as well set up as it is for people to get close to the horses and start to sort of appreciate the sort of main protagonists of the sport. It makes that journey so much easier for people. And one of the things I wanted to touch on was your lovely daughter Ruby, who she's completely obsessed with Glorious Angel. And tell us about that, and tell us about the love affair that's building between those two.
So yeah, I mean it's a lovely story, to be honest. So the transition into sort of being interested in horse racing and then coming into Roudee was through somebody that works with Gail and I, and it's actually Dylan's brother who introduced us to Dylan, and then eventually to Mike, and the Ruby rides not extremely well, but she's learning every day, and she loves horses. And unfortunately, during the pandemic, she'd lost a bit of that because it was all shut down. So with Glorious, we wanted, it was really a bit of an interest for the family, as well as selfishly a bit more of an involvement for me, and a toe in the water to race ownership, because it totally new. And I'll be perfectly honest, I thought it was for rich toffs who had too much money, if I'm perfectly blunt. But in fairness to Dylan and Mike, what they're trying to do with Roudee in making it accessible to normal hardworking people, I think is fantastic. And we got down to the stables to meet Glorious for the first time, and you know, they took this yearling out of a field covered in mud, and I was like, you expect me to, you know, put money into this? What's this? What's this you show? This isn't a racehorse. But from that moment, Ruby saw her. It was a complete love affair, and I think it's fair to say Gail fell in love with her as well. So even from those first early visits at the stables, where Ruby would hold on to her lead rope, have a picture taken, give her a pat, and you know, some food and stuff, that has just been absolutely fantastic to watch that grow.
Yeah.
And now, certainly at the first race at Nottingham, you know, Ruby had painted her nails in the Roudee Racing colours and everything like that. So fantastic. Yeah, absolutely fantastic.
And had you been down to the yard before? Was that the first time, or had you been before?
It was the first time. It was the first time. I'd been quite local to Manor House. I'd been down the lane and sort of had a peek from the end of the drive and thought, wow, that looks impressive. But I think the setting there is absolutely beautiful. And you know, you go down that rolling drive, and the yard opens up in front of you. On a gloriously sunny day, it's fantastic. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, it's the facilities there are wonderful, and obviously it's you know, with all the changes that have happened in the last few months, it's a really exciting place to be, with all these you know, double the amount of horses that were there
absolutely
previously as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
We have our horses that are stabled next to, you know, horses that are being earmarked or who have running and won group ones. So, you know, I guess we're sort of that's the benchmark now, isn't it? That's what we expect.
Well, this is it. This is, the expectations are high, aren't they? And I think it's great. And I think, you know, all of the staff down at Manor House have been so welcoming. You know, Colin, Hugo's team are just fantastic, and they're really fantastic with Ruby as well, because they can see that young person's interest, and they, you know, they've taken around the other horses and, you know, shown her the tack room and things like that. So that's great. And that, I think, to Gail and I, has probably been equally important, if not more important. You know, the way that everybody in the syndicate, as well as the yard, has sort of accepted Ruby as just another member of the syndicate, and I think that's fantastic. You know, and of course she's now chief horse namer. So she's having a good run at that too. So
there is that photo from Glorious Angel when she was in the winners' enclosure at Nottingham, with Ruby holding the reins with a huge smile on her face. And you know, it's wonderful to hear you talk about that, because you know, I think you sort of mentioned that you thought sort of ownership was for rich toffs, and I suppose this is sort of the purpose of the pod and discussions like this, is to try and actually lay bare people's perceptions of racing, and then try to sort of understand how people have experienced the sport once they've found a way in, and actually talk about the fact that there are ways into it, and to hear that it's about so much more than just prize money, you know, is wonderful.
You know, I mean, you always want the horses to do well. I think Mike put it best when he said, you know, if we can have a horse that we can, you know, cheer at, and she's doing well. You look at Glorious and Lily Agnes, you know, we were all up on that stage. We were cheering like the rain was coming stair rods sideways, but we were cheering because she did so well, you know. And I think that if you can get that out of the experience and nothing else, that's fantastic. And I think what the guys are doing at Roudee Racing is absolutely really, really strong. Because, like I say, because you perceive it being an out of reach sort of hobby. I mean, what other hobby or interest in sport could you get right up close, personal to the absolute top brow Premier League sort of caliber of jockeys, owners, trainers, and horses as well? I mean, we had the 1,000 and 2,000 guineas jockey riding our horse.
Yeah,
it's amazing, isn't it? You know, and you know, we're just ordinary hardworking people, and I think that's fantastic. I think that's
it's a lovely thread that runs through the sport. And yes, there are rich owners, but actually the majority of the protagonists, whether it's jockeys, owners, etc., seem to be incredibly down to earth people from, I'd say, most cases, relatively humble backgrounds. Compared to the sort of the sheikhs who have all the money.
Yeah, sure.
And so that's from my perspective has been something that, to your point there, I've seen as well. So, and just let's briefly, we've got a couple of minutes left. Let's touch on the horses themselves. Firstly, actually, let's talk about Ibiza Love. There was you were caught on video. I don't know whether you've seen this. Practically riding the horse home in the last furlong at Doncaster at the weekend, but you must have been you were there. You must have been really thrilled with her debut on the racecourse.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad Mike shared that one. That's good of him. That's good. Yeah, no, and that's what it's about for me. I'd driven we as a family driven all the way to Doncaster to watch her run. It was a beautiful day. She didn't get a great start, but my God, she was 3 lengths off from the start, and then to come back to win third, and I think another furlong she'd have probably been first.
Yeah.
So yeah, really pleased with her. She had a great experience for her first time out. Ross, who's Glorious's first time jockey, looked after her, and that's all you can, for her first day at school, as Mike puts it. I think she had a really good experience, and hopefully, Mike and I are hopeful that she'll go on to do bigger and better things. So.
Absolutely, yeah, I think she's an exciting one for sure. And then the aforementioned Glorious Angel. So fingers crossed, is going to be running in 24 hours' time at Haydock. So I imagine the whole family is excited about that one. Are you planning to go along? Or?
Absolutely, yeah. So Ruby will be in school, watching out and cheering, I'm sure, on the quiet. But yes, Gail and I are planning to go tomorrow. Just hoping for the weather to stay the right side of dry and get, try and move that ground from good to soft to good if we can. But hopefully the rain will stay off and she'll have a good run. But she looks in, there's a field of 10, I think, running tomorrow, so it's quite a big field. If nothing else, she'll learn a lot from it. But I think she's got a good chance.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you on that. I think it was a couple of weeks later in the year last year where her sister won at Haydock on a beautiful sunny evening. I think on a Friday as well. So it's not quite the same meeting or the same race, but hopefully lightning can strike twice. And so I can't let you go without giving us a tip for this weekend. I have a hunch what it might be, but who do you fancy this weekend, Scott?
Gail would never forgive me if I said anybody else, so it's definitely Glorious Angel tomorrow at Haydock, 100%.
Fantastic, good stuff. And I think it's the 155.
It's 155. Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, it's funny how these things get etched in your mind. Good man, brilliant. Look, Scott, I think I'd love to talk to you all day, to be honest, mate. But thank you for sharing your kind of experience. Fascinating to hear where it all started and just how much fun you're having with ownership and the whole family is having. And yeah, hopefully we'll see each other again very soon on the racecourse.
Definitely. Thanks very much, Ben, and thanks to Dylan and Mike for roping us in and making it such an enjoyable experience for all the owners. It really is a fantastic group of people as well to be involved with, yourself and all the other guys and girls in the syndicate. It's just brilliant. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cheers, Ben.
Good man. Thanks, Scott.
So we're fortunate enough to welcome back Mike Edwards from Roudee Racing for another episode of the pod. Mike, how you doing?
Yeah, good, man. Yeah, really good. You?
Fantastic. Yeah, not bad. Thank you, mate. Not bad. Yeah, good week and another runner to look forward to hopefully tomorrow. So anticipation is slowly building. So yeah, no, all good, mate. Thank you. Well, we're going to start by looking back before we look forward. So last week, obviously, we talked about an exciting weekend ahead with 2 runners at Doncaster, and we talked about the treble. So Ibiza Love, Roudemental, and Liverpool. The one leg of the treble that I was least fussed about came in, so I suppose you were still happy, but
yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, it's probably the most important part of the treble for me, if I'm honest. But yeah, I suppose I shouldn't say that. But no, I mean, Liverpool won, and both horses ran really, really well. So overall, despite the fact that me saying they'd win, they both ran really well. I mean, Ibiza Love really went in at 7:10, and she really took the preliminaries really, really well. She was so relaxed. She had quite a lot of support there. It's quite busy, and it is quite enclosed at one side of Doncaster, but she was absolutely fine. Went down to post really, really well, really relaxed, and then loaded really well. And unfortunately, just broke slowly. I think at one point after the first sort of furlong, she was out of the shot on the TV. So to then sort of Ross just gradually brought it up into the field. It didn't really get massively on terms with anything, but ran with such great credit. She took a gap up the inside rail sort of late on, and then was doing all her best work really at the end, and finished really, really strongly. So, despite it, I mean, she finished third on a debut, so she's in the winners enclosure. There's prize money. So for us, it was the really, really encouraging run. And if she can improve from that, it's not going to be long. You wouldn't have thought before. Really, she makes the top spot. Is it? You would like to hope. Anyway, it was really, really encouraging. And,
absolutely. We were just talking to Scott a moment ago about that bit of video footage. So it was very encouraging. But she was finishing strongly enough to give her owners due reason to practically ride the horse to the finish themselves. So that was.
I mean, that's the good thing about Doncaster, where you watch it in the sort of parade ring. The TV, as you look at the track, is sort of on the left-hand side. So you sort of maybe a couple of 100 yards from the finish yourself. So you're watching it on the screen. We were watching it on the screen, and then as she's coming towards us, she looks like she's closing and closing and closing. So for that last 100 yards, all you do is start looking at the screen and start running alongside the horse towards the finish line. As you could see with Scott on the video. So it's good, and it was great to see Scott. Roudee was so excited as well, and to say, finished third, considering the start we had. Really, you couldn't see us not winning the race. I don't think, if you'd have broken on terms with everything else. I think it was, for me, I was surprised the racing process and put her as an eye catcher. Pleased. So hopefully she'll go on.
There are some advantages, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. But for me, definitely one to take out of the race, even not being biased, So yeah, really good. Really good.
Fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. No, absolutely. And then 2 races later we had Roudemental running in the handicap. What were your thoughts on his performance?
You'd probably tell from last week, I was really bullish about Roudemental's chances. I think everyone was. I think that was, nothing. It wasn't a secret really from his previous run. He ran so well, looked so promising. And for me, I was just a little bit concerned beforehand with the ground, and if the ground had turned to firm ground, I'm doubtful we would have actually ran him. But in hindsight, when you think about it, and the times probably support this a little bit as well, I think it was such a hot day that the going was given, good to firm at the start of the card, and the track must have dried out significantly towards the last race. He ran into the second to last race, and I think it's got to be really on it virtually firm when he's gone off, which we don't think suits him. He went down to the start well, everything was good, but then broke a little bit slowly, got a nudge and everything coming out of stalls. And then when you see the first shot of him, when Ross sort of goes to nudge him up, he's sweating quite heavily, Now he does do that at home. Speaking with Hugo, he does do that at home, so it is a trait of his, but I thought it was a lot more than he normally would. So whether behind the back of the stalls, he's just, being aware of the ground, whether going down to the start, he's been a little bit aware of it, although it is a little bit, I think, all weather surface going down. I think you don't know. But still, he's ran really, really well. And he's done exactly what he always does, which is he's so tough, gets his head down, battles towards the end, and just got picked off at the end by, I mean, we touched on it last week, didn't we, at Fresh Hope with James Spencer. You know, there was always a possibility that was going to happen. I just think when you watch him on the last furlong, the furlong and a half, he's not enjoying the ground as much. So I think you'll see a much better run. I mean, that's a great run anyway, isn't it? Again, we finished in the his enclosure, finished third, giving him everything he sort of got, giving us plenty to shout about over the last sort of furlong, which again is something that's great when you go in the races and the crowd of you've got a horse running, as disappointed as you are when it doesn't win.
Yeah.
You've still got something, if you've still got something to shout about in that last furlong and try and shout them home, it's still exciting stuff, isn't it? So
absolutely.
Listen, he will be a better horse on a softer surface. I'm absolutely certain of that.
Yeah.
We'll probably find out in his next run.
Absolutely, yeah. Fingers crossed. I mean, it's an interesting sort of topic of conversation that maybe we should tackle another time. But when the racecourses give the going description and then the reality of that going, and it did sound as though we were running on sort of extreme ground on Saturday. But I think him going to the front, it was. I mean, you should be a tipster, Mike, because as you rightly say, you went through the form with a fine tooth comb and picked out the winner 2 days prior to the race. But it was sort of set up for a classic Jamie Spencer waiting ride, wasn't it? So you can probably say we got beaten by a very good ride as well.
and you could say annoyingly you got it right this time as well, couldn't you? I mean, one of the times you want him to get it wrong, isn't it? But
indeed, yeah.
It's the good thing is, you'd have been disappointed, wouldn't you, if that was our ideal ground? If Good to Firm's our ideal ground, or Firms are ideal, you'd be disappointed. But when you can come out of it and look back and think, well, listen, there is a good reason behind and he's given everything. Even with that extreme, he was hanging a little bit towards the end, which probably pushed Fresh Hope and caused Fresh Hope to hang a little bit as well.
Yeah.
But even that, he's still giving everything. So, what a horse! What a horse going forward for the rest of the season.
Yeah, the attitude, as is one of the owners, of Roudemental myself. When you any horse that you're involved with, when they have an attitude like that, it's a huge part of the battle, and you can be really excited when a horse is going to put it all in. There was one thing I wanted to just quickly touch on, because you and I were talking about this. That is fascinating, sort of learning all the time with these things. But you mentioned that he did hang right in the finish, and that to you was an indicator of the fact that the ground was probably a bit firm for him. Just very briefly, what is it about a horse hanging that makes you think maybe the ground is causing them a bit of discomfort?
Yeah, I mean, there is many reasons for them to be hanging, but I just think he didn't want to go through with his run completely. I mean, that could be that he's just feeling that ground a little bit. It's just causing him a little bit of discomfort, a little bit of pain maybe, and just causing him sort of to drift off to his right. I mean, he never hung really badly, but he did it enough for you to think there's something not quite right there. It's not his normal trait. So as I say, it could have just been a little, that jar on the ground, a bit discomfort, a little bit of pain from it. He just really doesn't like it, and want to go through with his run. But at the same time, he's still trying to give us everything. Amazing, really.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's fascinating, and I think for listeners to the pod, this is these are the sorts of things we want to try and unpick a little bit, because it's you see a horse hang, and the commentators pointed out, the jockeys and the trainer might point it out afterwards, but there's rarely an explanation for it. So it's just really interesting to sort of start to kind of get under the skin of it. Now let's look forward to this weekend, or rather tomorrow. We've got Glorious Angel is declared to run in the 155 at Haydock, and I think we're probably all, given what we've talked about at length pre and post Chester, we're all pretty hopeful of a good run, I imagine, and we're just praying that the weather behaves itself. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think so. It's good to soft at the moment. I think we want ideally good to soft in places. You would still imagine would be fine, but good ground for us would be absolutely ideal. Hugo's stepped it up to 6 furlongs. And there's no reason why she can't run really well at 6 furlongs. I mean, if she ran at Chester, coming widest of all ground she didn't like, she's probably not far off run 6 furlongs at Chester. A bit extreme that maybe. She's
Yeah.
ran widest of all, and in no way was she easing off at the finish. So you'd like to think there's the step up in trip's not going to be an issue. The ground, I think, she's only got, Hugo touched on it last time, she's only got really small feet, so she doesn't want to be going through, soft ground. I don't think that's going to see an optimum at all. So, it's given a dry day today at Haydock. Hopefully it's dry all day. It has then give showers and thunderstorms tomorrow, but looking at the forecast again, they're later in the afternoon. So, it's just fingers crossed. I mean, that's part of the racing, isn't it? More, these horses that are to some degree ground dependent, you are at the lap of the gods really about whether you can run. And interesting enough, we've probably had the driest last, if you look at records, we've probably had the driest last couple of months we've ever had. Yet all of a sudden it has to rain for a day, and we're on soft ground, so I'm sure watering helps that in any way, but probably another one for deep ground going
Absolutely.
forward.
I'm just making a list of all these topics, Mike, and then we can we'll be good for content for the rest of the year. So, but yeah, exactly. Being first and foremost, or sort of initially anyway, a fan of the jumps. Haydock after it's rained is synonymous with sort of Bristol Demise slogging through heavy ground over 3 miles plus. So
you enjoy the rain, don't you? The more rain, the better for you guys.
I think you have to really, otherwise, what the hell are you doing following jumps racing? But yeah, it's I know.
I have to go to the races with a coat on. I'm disappointed. You know what I mean? So I don't think we would cope with those winter conditions.
We'll get you down. We'll get you down. That's a project for from October this year onwards. That's a project is to get you down to a nice cold, wet day at Cheltenham. That's where that's where the magic really happens. Good man. Well, look, I mean, we asked you last week for a tip, and I don't know whether you've got one for us for this weekend.
Right,
Put you on the spot.
Yeah, you have. You've put me on the spot a little bit. I just think, right, okay, I'll give you an each way tip. Now, can I give you a massive amount of backup on this? Probably not, because I haven't. I've backed our own horses the last couple of weeks, and so I'm
that's why I asked. I figured that's where we were going again, but it sounds like you might be going somewhere else, which is great.
yeah, on one, and I think we'll go with Davey's Angel tomorrow. But I think the main each way bet for me is on Saturday. I think it's the 3:45. It's the horse that finished second to Flaming Rib at Chester. A horse called King's Lynn that runs at Haydock tomorrow, and I think that's got a great each way show.
That is a fantastic pick because it's the one that I have my eye closely on as well. I noticed after Chester that it was carrying a lot of, giving Flaming Rib a lot of weight in that race and still ran a blinder. So that's interesting. Yeah.
It is weight for age, and that's the weight for age part of that is something maybe it's you want to ask Hugo on. Next time you go on a pod, or weight for age is a really interesting subject, and it's not one that I'm clued up enough on yet, really, to be able to give you that. But just basically weight for age, Kingslin was giving Flaming Rib £9 off level ability. Essentially, they're both officially rated the same. Yeah, Flaming Rib was given £9 like Kingslin. So I think I'm expecting Kingslin to run really well.
Fantastic. You might just have trampled on my weekend selection there, but I've now got about half an hour to work out whether I'm going to be with you or find something else. But that's brilliant.
Why don't you cut mine out? Cut mine out and then do a little bit more research, and then you could probably back it up a little bit better than I just have by saying this is my
Not at all. No, I mean, I've had a good look at it and I like it. So anyway, look, good man. That's a fantastic one. Well, hopefully listeners will be following Kings Lynn in the 3:45, the Kazoo Temple Stakes at Haydock on Saturday. I think he's 8-1 at the moment, so you're definitely getting a nice each way price about it. Mike, good man. Thank you as always for coming on the pod, and good luck tomorrow. We'll be watching the 155 at Haydock for Glorious Angel and hoping that she puts her best foot forward.
Right, mate. Good stuff.
So a massive thank you to our guests this week, Scott and Mike. Some fantastic insight into the sort of the more sort of specific side of racing and form, and but also into just the love of the sport. I love that story from Scott about the sort of the involvement of the whole family, Bruno. It warms the cockles to hear his story, doesn't it?
It does. And what I guess is coming across now that we've interviewed, obviously, Mike on a regular basis, but also had Neil Mather come on for a bit, is that everyone's coming at it from a slightly different angle, but or with a different background and different connection to the sport. But there's this great common ground that knits us all together. So, but yeah, the family piece is lovely, and one I'd love to replicate in terms of bringing my own kids along to the races and getting them into it, because the love of the animal really comes across in that particular example, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, it certainly does. Really interesting that it seems that a lot of people we've spoken to, both on the pod and elsewhere, have sort of started off from a punting perspective, whether that be punting themselves or whether that be a family member that was having a bet at the weekend and they were sort of helping select the horse or just shouting the horse home that their sort of parent or grandparent had backed, and then sort of moving into it that way, but then developing a love for the wider sport and the horse itself. From that sort of foundation. So that's really interesting. I think that's something you and I, when we first started this podcast, thought was probably the way into racing for the majority of people, and then people want to find out more after they've sort of reached perhaps a natural plateau of understanding based on what's available in the Racing Post every day. And we've by no means done a sample size of the entire UK population or anything like that, but it certainly seems that that's the way in for a lot of people, as it has been for us. So that's been really interesting. So we're going to go into deep ground, which this week is looking at our racegoers getting the best bang for their buck at the track. And given what we've talked about there about people sort of coming into racing via punting, and then enjoying a day at the races, I think it's a really timely thing to talk about. And also, given the sort of current, economic environment in which we're living, the cost of living, and it is causing people to think very carefully about what they spend their money on. And, we're seeing falling attendances at racecourses. And so, are people getting the best value for money? Because I think that's more important for racing. We talk about existential issues for the sport, and I think this is absolutely at the top of that list. So we were going to kick off by having a look at our own experiences, because at the end of the day, it is completely sort of subjective, isn't it? And looking at our own sort of best and worst experiences, and then seeing if there are some sort of common threads there. So, Bruce, what's your best experience at the racecourse, and why?
I would probably plump very quickly for our trip over to Leopardstown back in 2019 for, I think it was the first sort of rebranding of that as the Dublin Racing Festival. So maybe we were, is that right? I feel like
I think it might have been year 2, but it was in its infancy.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So maybe it was still drumming up business to an extent, but the whole thing was smooth from just the number of people there. You had plenty of room to move around, walk around. Getting a drink was not a problem. Just the fact that you had a designated seat, and we obviously paid a little bit more to get a seat in an enclosure high up pretty much over the winning post. But that's sort of a rare experience at a racecourse, isn't it, to have that? And we just sat there, and obviously it helped that we had quite a few winners that weekend. The sort of luck I've not seen since.
Which is not something the race
but-
courses can do anything about, but
No, that's not for them to deal with. Nor is the sunshine that we got all weekend that weekend either. But the whole thing was smooth, particularly as the two of us coming over from Heathrow or Gatwick, I forget which. It was easy to kind of manoeuvre the whole thing around getting back after the racing on Sunday as well. So we were, home before midnight back in South London on the Sunday evening. So the whole thing was just really kind of just easy, I suppose. And we stayed in Dublin, easy to get in and out of Dublin on the tram. Just all of that is part of the experience, isn't it? It's not just being at the course, it's also the getting to and from and all that stuff. So I'd say that's probably the one that sticks out for me. Is that similar for you, or
I would say that
in your back catalogue?
Without wanting to just reiterate everything you said, yes, it absolutely was. It's not really a sitting down sport racing, is it? Well, it's not perceived as such.
No.
I suppose if you spoke to a different demographic, then you might get a very different view on it. But yeah, I did look, and actually it was 110 euros. We're obviously having a particularly good time of things per ticket that we paid. So we did pay a premium. I think that was important to say. But more importantly, obviously it wasn't like we were sort of in this premium enclosure the whole time. Yes, we got a nice seat at the finishing post, but actually just being out across the paddock and pretty much everywhere we went on the racecourse, it didn't feel overcrowded. You could get a drink whenever you wanted. People were very, very friendly. You had people sort of coming up to you and talking to you about racing. Just the overall experience was really positive. So that would definitely be one. There's two others I wanted to mention. I mean, Chester, I'm not just saying that because we are closely affiliated with Roudee Racing. Chester's fantastic, but they're a privately owned course, and Ascot, when I've been to Ascot, is the same. York, I hear very good things about too. These being a Goodwood, these privately owned race courses, perhaps unsurprisingly, do provide a particularly good experience. I think Leopardstown is also privately owned. Right. But just everything from being able to get a drink, to having good food options, to having great access to the parade ring, and sort of everything else around that. Chester is fantastic. The other one, to put a jockey club racecourse spin on it, was I was lucky enough to go to the July course at Newmarket last summer, and it was it was a Saturday. I forget the race, but it was a big 6 furlong handicap sprint. Was the big race of the day. So by no means a sort of an insignificant race day, and it was just a beautiful day, but it just felt cool, comfortable. The way the stand is, you get shade behind the stand. There's places to sit. There's places to have a drink and some food and actually sit and relax as if you were in a nice sort of terrace cafe somewhere in Mediterranean Europe. And I just thought, what wonderful experience, and to be in to be in racing heartland like Newmarket. And I know that's the Jockey Club HQ, but obviously the Jockey Club is that the race courses are run differently to the sort of privately owned race courses. So those three stand out for me, and those are the reasons why. But I think comfort at a race meeting is a really big thing that I look for now, because and I'm sure I'm not alone in that. If you're going to take the time and money to invest in racing, then you want to enjoy it, and you don't want to be shoulder to shoulder and struggling to enjoy it. What about the worst experiences? I feel like there's something bubbling here that you want to talk about. There's one in particular.
There's probably quite a few, to be fair, and I don't want this to turn into a rant about terrible experiences, but just to the comfort factor. You're there at the racecourse, and particularly jumps fans like you and I are there, between the months of October and April at best. The weather's not likely to be brilliant. Okay, so and you're there for 4 or 5 hours. It's not like a football match, an intense 90 minutes, and everyone's packed in, and that's part of the experience. You need that comfort element. It sounds like a luxury, but it's essential, isn't it, to actually kind of stay in the course of the whole fixture and enjoying it right to the end. But I'm just going to bring one example out, which is Lingfield at a meeting in, I think it was February of this year, 7 race card, absolutely tipping it down all day long. And just what we ended up doing, because the facilities were so poor to watch racing in the flesh, we ended up sort of sitting in the members bar. We weren't members, but we were just able to sit in there and watch it on the telly. You know, that's what we were resorted to. That's where you could have a drink, because you can take drinks out onto the track. There was a very, very small area which was covered of like 3 rows of standing, like an old school football terrace without seats. It was not a course that was set up for a midwinter jumps meeting at all. Lingfield in the summer is obviously has its own charm, and that's probably what it's best known for. But it certainly felt like it wasn't set up for what it was supposed to do that day. So that was poor. The cost of the ticket was, for what we got there was also ridiculous. For just a general admission ticket, it was I think £45 for that day,
Really?
Which you'd expect to almost going for free at that level. I remember going King George Day at Kempton as at the entry level ticket, and it was £20, wasn't it, on the door?
Yeah.
Okay, we're talking about 10 years ago, but there's certainly a bit of a mismatch there. So that was a particularly poor experience that I had.
Yeah.
But yeah, unfortunately, it's not an irregular kind of anomalous experience either. That kind of thing tends to happen quite a bit based on the racehorses we've been at, I think.
Yeah, price of admission's a really interesting one. So I'm off to Sandown this evening, and I think it's £15 for a ticket. In fact, it is £15 for a ticket. And it's we've got a I think the Heron Stakes is a grade a Group 3. I forget exactly, but it's a quality race with some serious horses for the future in it. And Sandown in an affluent part of southwest London, it's a beautiful racecourse, one of my favourite racecourses just to watch racing. So to be able to get in there for £15 is compared to what you're describing at Lingfield, where I think the general quality of the racing relative to the jump season was significantly lower than what we're going to get at Sandown this evening. That is a big mismatch for sure. And I think sort of entry prices are a really interesting one, because we talk about Cheltenham, and we talk about the 5th day, and could there be a more damning indictment of the 5th day of the Cheltenham Festival being a terrible idea for the sport than getting an extra 50,000 people through the door just to subject them to long queues for the bar, and to pay, I don't know what the cheapest ticket is for a day at the festival now. It gets a little bit more expensive as the week wears on, but you're not getting in for anything less than £50. And for that privilege, you're just getting a scrum, which seems crazy to me. Look, we're not exactly coming up with new ground here, uncovering new ground, but that doesn't stack up for me. What do you think?
Yeah, totally agree. I was looking at other sports just to kind of gauge racing, completely on the same page as everything gone up, because obviously these venues have had to close for the majority of the last 2 years and are trying to probably recoup our losses. So which I get. But I look at grounds admission pass for Wimbledon, for example, right, one of the most well-known sports tournaments worldwide.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get into Wimbledon this coming summer and go to the 15 or 16 outside courts at your own leisure, take your drinks in or buy drinks there and watch tennis with your drink for the price of £27. Okay, obviously there are then tiers up to go into the show courts and all that sort of thing, but that's like a fair price. The Dublin Racing Festival for next year, early bird ticket prices, albeit, but you can get them as cheap as €30. Average match day ticket in the Premier League, talking about the best league in the world, and I do think that's almost factual now. At Liverpool, you're looking at a £59 average price for a match day ticket. Test cricket, England are playing India at Edgbaston in a few weeks' time, I think. £54 for an unrestricted view seat. Again, you can take your drinks in, you can have drinks there. So it's just not adding up for me, the Cheltenham experience. And on top of that, you've got the accommodation piece. I remember in one of the earlier episodes we talked about what does the kind of the minimum cost need to look like to actually attend Cheltenham, and it's unworkable in the current climate for me.
Yeah, I think there's some really interesting comparisons you've made there. I would throw one in as well. Going to watch rugby at Harlequins. We're sort of a 10-minute drive away, 20-minute drive away from Quins in southwest London, and for sort of the ticket prices have been ticking up slowly over the years, as with everywhere. But for sort of 40 quid, you've got a seat for the match, you've got great atmosphere, you've got a load of good food options. There is a queue for the bar, but they pour the pints quickly. It's set up so that your experience around the sporting spectacle is as good as it can possibly be. Now, we're sort of moving in there to the sort of the once you're in, what else are you spending money on territory? Food and drink is a prime example, and I think that's another really important variable that I think, if I'm honest, you've got a dichotomy within racing of courses that do it brilliantly and then courses that seem to conversely treat it as a complete afterthought. And now far from wanting to sort of as you said, make this a rant about bad experience, because there are loads of places where the experience is really good, and we've talked about some of those. But food, if you're asking, you talk about Test cricket and Wimbledon, and the price it is to get in there, and you're there, they're comparable because you're there for several hours. It's not a football match or rugby match. You're there for sort of 4 or 5 hours at least. And so you need food and you need a drink, whether that's alcoholic or not. And so yes, there's a conversation about the price, but I think more to the point, it's the value for money and the options that exist. And if people are presented with options where they have to pay a bit more for, but what they're getting is really nice and they've got lots of choice, then it's not cheap. Everyone knows it's not cheap to get a Pimm's and some food at Wimbledon, but the food is generally of good quality. The Test cricket, if you go to the Oval, for example, which I go to fairly often, there's a whole variety of burgers to pizzas to sandwiches to vegetarian food. Like they have a whole kind of street food, street truck kind of vibe going on, which you see almost everywhere these days. You go to Sandown, beautiful race course, always get good racing. It's fantastic for the race goer in terms of getting close to the horses, much like Chester. The food is really poor. It genuinely feels like they've just tagged that on, and that just doesn't stack up for me when you've got yes, we talked about the entrance fee being pretty fair, but once you're in, I'm going to be there from 4:30 until 8:30, 9 o'clock tonight. I intend to have some dinner, and I know that I'm probably going to be paying something that I'm not particularly comfortable paying for something that's definitely not worth that, and I'll have very little choice. It's something that really I really sort of rankers with me, because that is something that I think racecourses as events venues should take seriously, given how seriously other sports seem to be taking it. What's your view on the sort of catering side of things, I suppose?
Yeah, completely agree. And I think what bothers me is that these are quite easily fixable things in my mind, and actually things that if you do fix, you're going to get a returning customer there because their experience is enhanced. If that requires a little bit more investment at the front end, fine. But that is, that's the way any game works, any business works. You need to make that investment and get that repeat customer coming back. And at the moment, people are probably thinking, if they're comparing experiences that they want to have, because they've got to reduce the number they have as a result of cost of living elsewhere, then the race course experience or the race day might be on the chopping block, because I'd rather go to Wimbledon or Lords or whatever it is, because I know as a whole experience it's going to be better. I have trust in that experience, whereas racing, and it's a broad stroke here, probably has not earned that trust, or it's taking its eye off the ball, or worse, it's just got a captive audience there, and they've decided, this is what we're going to do. We're going to really kind of cut down on our costs, and it's going to be the end sort of consumer or user that suffers as a result. And that's my worry, is that's where we're at. I don't know if that's true or not. That's just my reading of racing, maybe more broadly, and the way it's run.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a really interesting interview with Lydia Hislop. Maddie Playle does a series of interviews through the Racing Post now. And she interviews Lydia Hislop this week. So interesting having the sort of tables turned. And I mean, Lydia is a very, she's very well informed, very articulate journalist who I know you and I certainly rate very highly. That's not saying anything new, but
Yeah.
she talks about her fears for racing going forward, much like you just have, and plenty of other voices like that. And a lot of that is the fear for it sort of being run without strategy, I think is how she put it. I thought that was a really nice, because that captures any manner of sins, whether that is too much racing. And I note that a plan to scrap 300 races from the calendar sounds like it might not be going ahead. So even just canning what would be less than one race a day is proving difficult to do, which is a big worry. But that then goes all the way through to, sleepwalking into a world where racegoers just don't want to go anymore. And then, how does the sport come back from that? And, I think that was a really well sort of a really good assessment from Lydia of where we are, exactly in line with what you've just said. And yeah, we wanted to talk about this not because we wanted to sort of bash race courses, because far be it for us to tell these places how to do business, but I think equally it's a sport that we love, and I think you can see that because we're passionate about it, we're prepared to look past some of these things. But for the people that are going to get into it in the future, whether that's a new audience or whether that's people that already have some interest in it, there's a huge amount of competition. There's this talk about the racing league, in flat racing, and trying to capture a new audience. I'd forget all of that. Make race days good for people that want to go and watch racing, and they're not at the moment. They are not up to the level of other sports. So it's and there are very good models, as we've talked about in the likes of Ascot and Chester, and as I understand it, York, etc. So it's not like it's every single, and some of the Jockey Club race courses do it well too, but there definitely seems to be some paint peeling off to a worrying extent. So I feel like we could. What would be the one thing? We didn't necessarily prep this. What would be the one thing if you were sort of wanting a better race day experience? What would be the one thing, apart from backing winners, which neither of us can do at the moment, that you'd want to see race courses improve at?
If I had to pick one, I think it'd just be how I watch the racing. It almost seems a bit too like whatever I do when I turn up at the racecourse, I feel like I'm not in the best position to watch this race. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is what was unlocked at Leopardstown when we went, is that you had your seat. I want racing to be that kind of free, liberating, racecourses to be that kind of experience, because that's part of the fun. But also, I just like to have a spot that I know I've paid the right money for, and I know I'm going to get value for money. I'm going to see the sport in its best light. That's still a big doubt for me. I think that's number one thing you'd expect from a sporting event, is that you're going to see the content of that event well. And I'm just nuts about that, to be honest. So that would be the number one thing for me. What about yourself?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, you think about getting your Cheltenham ticket, you pay premium price for the club enclosure, and as a viewing spectacle. I mean, we went a bit further down the track into the Tattersalls enclosure and watched Energumene jump the second last in the champion chase, and that was just as good as being further up. With and I know Cheltenham is Cheltenham, and it's not quite the same pretty much anywhere else for the rest of the year. But I would say probably that is got to be near the top for me. The big one is, the big bugbear of mine is trying to get a pint. It is absolutely insane at Cheltenham. And there is no reason this can't be improved, that you have to queue up. At the festival this year, between races, I think it was just before the Ryanair, I went at the end of the Potemps, I went straight to the bar, queued for half an hour, and hadn't even got to the front of the queue. And the bar staff just looks like it's their first day at school. It's their first day of pouring a pint.
It probably is.
And it probably is. But there's really no excuse. When you look at the other sports, there's really no excuse for that. It's mad. And there's people in the queue looking at each other and trying to sort of make light of it. But deep down, you're like, bloody hell, I'm not just get, it's not like I want to have 10 pints this afternoon. I just want to have a couple, but I can't even get that. You look at rugby at Twickenham, where you've got a similar number of people, more people, and they just are pouring pints all the time and then just handing those over to people at the till. I don't understand, why race courses, when on really busy days, can't just set themselves up for that, because they would sell a hell of a lot more beer. So that would be my one.
Yeah, no, agreed. There's a few more there as well, aren't there? But yeah.
But it's a wonderful thing to go to a day at the races, and we want it to be even better for people. So yeah, it'd be interesting to know your thoughts as well. So please do share those with us on the various channels on YouTube comments or on Instagram or on Twitter, and let us know what your views are, whether there are things that you particularly enjoyed or things that can be improved. Right, let's move on to this weekend's selection, shall we? I've actually got one ready this week, which is unusual, and it's also been tipped up on the pod already today. So I came into it feeling like I was quite interested. Actually, I noticed that it's been backed even whilst we've been doing this. So maybe I should I go first, given that I've launched?
Yeah, you better get in there quickly before the price goes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's already plummeting. So Mike has already given it away, and it's perhaps it's Mike's money that's moved the market in the last 20 minutes. So I like in the Temple Stakes, the 3:45 at Haydock tomorrow. I liked King's Lynn after his run at Chester, where he was second to Flaming Rib. And I looked at that race again, and I noticed that King's Lynn was giving Flaming Rib what was it, £9 for a 1.5 length defeat. And King's Lynn's a horse that ran brilliantly as a 4-year-old in the King Stand last year, and then backed up again later on in the week at Ascot and ran well, and finished close up both times. Was denied a clear run. Could well have been a winner at Royal Ascot last year. So when King's Lynn went straight into my tracker, I noticed he was priced up. Well, when Mike mentioned it earlier, I checked it. It was 8-1. It's now come into a best price 13-2. So it's still an each way price. But I think if you can get 13-2, 4 places, something like that, then you're looking in good nick. I'm going to go half a point each way purely because Winter Power's in the race, and that is rated nearly £10, £9 higher than King's Lynn, which I think is second highest rated in the race. So I think if you take Winter Power out, I wouldn't put people off backing King's Lynn without the favourite. But yeah, I'm going to go King's Lynn in the 3:45 at Haydock, the Temple Stakes, Group 2, half a point each way. How about you, Bruce?
Very nice. I will also stay in Haydock, but for Saturday's meeting, the Kazoo Silver Bowl Handicap, run over 1 mile, and the horse I like in that is Mr. Wilson, and it's the old trusted angle of an Irish trained horse coming across to Britain for a run off bottom weight, with jockey Aidan Keeley taking a further £7 off as well. Mr. Wilson's the horse. Obviously, there's that Ireland factor. The pedigree would also suggest that 1 mile, which he has run a little bit over in his past as a 2-year-old, is the right trip for him. He's by Al Haybaib, who's absolutely side some good milers. In his latest run, he was second to Marquez Panam, who looks a decent horse. That was a decent looking handicap that he came second to at Nace, and those two finished well clear of the rest of the field. That horse, the one who finished first, Marquez Panam, has since come out and won well. So it'll be 1 point on the nose for me for Mr. Wilson for Mr. Gavin Cromwell.
And that's even in knowing the price, is it?
Well, I saw he was 10-1 with one firm, but 7-1 with another. So I imagine there'll be a bit of shortening that might happen. But yeah, I'm just going to go 1 point on the nose for now. But as we know, the tipping video is final. So let's see.
So look out for Saturday morning for the final tipping advice. I love that. That's a great pick. I mean, look, you make a fantastic case. And also, I wanted to point out, last week we talked about the fact that you move markets. Well, you backed Red Vineyard at 10-1, and it already shortened to 8-1 by the time the podcast went live, or shortly after it did, and then it halved in price by the following morning. So, yeah, Mr. Wilson, get on now, because you ain't going to get that 13-2, 7-1, or even 10-1 with 888 in once this podcast goes live.
Exactly, you get on now, and then when it shortens up, you can lay it because it won't win. But when the holy trinity of tipsters, Blake, Holding, and Brunetti, get behind one horse, then you've got to be on as well, haven't you?
Absolutely, you do. Yeah, well, I think you got in there first of those three. So great stuff. So that is Mr. Wilson 235 Haydock on Saturday. And then 2 races later, it's Kings Lynn in the 345 Group 2 Temple Stakes for me. Fantastic. Good, man. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode of the pod. Remember that you can access the pod across all the usual podcast platforms as well as YouTube. Please rate and review if you're so inclined. Make sure to follow Talking Horses Podcast, all one word, on Instagram for news about the podcast and plenty else from the racing world. Also follow Roudee Racing on Twitter for updates about the podcast too, and indeed all other information about Roudee Racing, whether it's horses or days out or how to get involved. And lastly, do please leave us your questions on any of those platforms, as I mentioned, if you have anything you'd like us to tackle in future shows. Enjoy the racing this weekend and gamble responsibly. We'll see you all next week.
See you next week.